Initially, during the pandemic, things got very, very quiet for Housing Options Scotland, as I imagine it did for many people who worked within housing. I think the sort of initial feeling was that this isn't going to last for very long. So we'll all just kind of batten down the hatches. We'll go home for a few weeks, and then once everything all opens back up again, then we can start to tackle our housing issues. We can start to tackle our housing problems. But it became quite clear after the few weeks had gone by that things weren't just going to return to normal very quickly. So slowly we started to see people coming back to us saying, you know, my housing issues still exist and now is the time that we need to try and tackle them. So, as I said, we had a bit of a quiet dip, but I think this quarter, just reading the stats here, we have had a 67% increase in the numbers of clients that have been coming through to Housing Options Scotland, which is a huge, huge increase for us when we've got such a small team working across the entirety of Scotland. So it was a huge sort of a raise in our demand for our service. But you know, we've got a great team and we were able to kind of manage these numbers. So we had people contacting us from, I think, 28 of 32 local authorities. So our issues were still widespread across the country. That said, there is a heavy focus on the Central Belt as is usual for our stats. So I thought it would be a nice wee thing to do, just to give you a wee bit of a case study from one of our clients that we were actually managed to help move during the pandemic, which is something that we didn't necessarily think that was going to be possible, but it turns out it was, and we're all very delighted. So I'm actually just going to read this case study out for you because it's been so wonderfully written. I don't want to mince my words, so I will just kick off here. So this story is about Dory, and Dory had been living in Leicester with her Siberian Husky, Midnight, when she began to have problems with a neighbour. She raised these problems with the housing officer, but the problems persisted and she felt unsafe at home. Dory said that she felt threatened and intimidated, and she didn't even like to go out in the garden. She didn't feel comfortable at all. It was horrible. So because of her situation, Dory wanted to move house. She'd always wanted to return to Scotland, where she grew up, although she didn't really know where to begin. She says that she just wanted to feel secure, to know that she could go out her front door and into the garden and not feel intimidated. And she thought that it would be better if she could get back home to Scotland. So, thinking it was best to start at the top, Dory contacted Nicola Sturgeon's office and she put her in touch with us. And from there, Dory's case was assigned to one of her colleagues, Karen, who is our military matters broker, because Dory had a sort of military background. So Karen was able to help Dory with the move, explaining all of the different things that she could consider and putting her in touch with the different people who could help. Dory decided that she would like to apply for social housing, but the wait was making her quite anxious. So there were times when she thought it was never going to happen. She says she had a lot of support from her son and he was very reassuring, but she was still worried that she'd have to be waiting a long time before she got offered something. After several false starts, it was suggested that Dory should try and make contact with housing associations and local council directly. So our broker Karen helped her to get in touch with Link Housing Association and then Perth and Kinross Council too. After discussing her needs with them, they phoned back a week later and actually offered her a bungalow in her home village. So Dory was asked if she wanted to see the bungalow in person, but obviously because of COVID-19, because of all the restrictions, this wasn't possible. So instead, we had pictures of the property taken and sent off to Dory so that she was able to have a look at them in her own home, on her iPad, and make the decision from a distance. So Dory saw the pictures and she did some research herself into the area. She'd seen one of the bungalows several years ago and she knew that they were lovely. I had a good feeling about it, so I said yes, and now 7 weeks later, I'm all moved in. She feels settled and she's looking forward to making new friends and catching up with old ones. And she's really delighted that she's got a lot of space for her Siberian Husky. So she's looking forward to being able to take it out for walks in the countryside. So there you go. That was our case study. So I hope that was a nice positive story for you all. And that's just one of the elements and one of the positive things that we've been able to do during lockdown. And just kind of further on to that, we seem to have had quite a lot of success within the sheltered housing section of social housing recently. I don't know whether there's just more availability at the moment, but we've had quite a few clients that even during the pandemic, they've been able to successfully move into sheltered housing, and it's made such a massive difference for these clients that we've got. So that was our nice good news story, and I'm just going to briefly run through a couple of other things that we're doing before handing over to Ben, who's going to talk about our volunteering programme that we have on at the moment. So I told you we had a 67% increase in our clients, and as a pretty much a direct result of that, we have hired 3 new members of staff. So from going from a small organisation, we've practically doubled overnight, really, or my team has certainly doubled overnight. So we've taken on another member of staff to help with our admin side of things, to deal with the inquiries, with the phone calls and the emails and everything. We just had a part-time member of staff before, so we now have 2 part-time members of staff to be able to deal with that. We have, well, Ben has a volunteer engagement assistant who's come on board to help him with his side of things, but he'll go into more detail with that later. We have started a new project which is focusing on independent living options for young people, and that's something that come January we hope that we'll be able to we're going to be able to launch, so we'll be able to share our news with you all about that. And that project is being run by Jill, who's one of our housing brokers. So she's in the research and development stage at the moment, so she's finding out everything she needs to know to help us to produce this project that will specifically focus on younger disabled people who are looking to live independently. And last but not least, we do have a new project on the horizon, which is what our 3rd member of staff has come on board for. But that at the moment is it's all under wraps. It's all a little bit secret. So stay tuned, and as soon as we are able to make our announcements about our new project, then we shall, and we'll keep you all in the loop. And on that note, I shall pass over to Ben.
Wonderful. Thank you, Olivia. So yes, hello. I'm Ben. I'm the Volunteer and Engagement Manager at Housing Options Scotland. What does that mean? It means I do lots of different things, but primarily, and for what we're talking about today, I manage our volunteer programme. So I thought it would probably be useful to maybe give you a little bit of a background about what volunteering at Housing Options has looked like sort of over the past year and a half, and then sort of a few reflections, I guess, of sort of what COVID has meant for the volunteering, because I think that a lot of the things that Olivia's spoken about in terms of us having sort of this huge surge in cases actually has meant lots of different things for what our volunteers have been doing too. And I think it's been one of the biggest success stories, I think, of COVID through Housing Options anyway. So yeah, I guess to give a bit of background. So the volunteering programme is something that we've been developing for sort of the past year and a half, I guess. And it's all been about trying to develop a volunteer programme which is sort of adds value to all of the stuff that I guess Olivia's team and the brokers do. So it's about designing a volunteer programme primarily for housing professionals, but we've also had some people get involved who don't have a housing background and just want to do some volunteering with us. But it's all been about sort of, like I say, offering that additional level of support to either the broker team or to our clients when we're working with them. So that's looking at the support that we can offer people sort of when they first get in contact with us as the organisation. So when they first approach Housing Options for help, it's looking at what support volunteers can offer to our clients sort of when their casework is ongoing. So when we're supporting them to find a housing solution. And it's also probably about what support can volunteers offer our clients when actually we're getting to the end of a case and when that case is being closed as well. So it's kind of been this touch-all project, which is sort of trying to support clients in lots of different ways. Historically, sort of going pre-COVID, if there ever was such a time. That's been a mix of sort of in-person volunteering and sort of online things. So we had our volunteers doing things like doing lots of outreach events. So, going and speaking to groups a bit like this, but in real life, and kind of, promoting the service that we offer. We had volunteers who were doing sort of specific support to clients. So they would be accompanying brokers on sort of client visits and stuff. In person, they might be accompanying clients to appointments with the local council, or if they were viewing properties or anything like that. So kind of being that extra person there as sort of moral support, I guess. And they were also doing a little bit of support, not in person, but over the phone and such. So if somebody wanted something explaining in a little bit more detail, obviously the brokers absolutely were able to do that. But as Olivia said, very small organization, very large number of clients. It's kind of having people who've got a little bit of housing background and knowledge to be able to offer that additional level of support. So that was kind of all happening in the background anyway. We also had a research project which was about supporting people when they move local authority areas to, we were writing sort of area guides is what we were calling them. So it was about being able to give people, when they move into a new area, an information booklet which would explain all about the different sort of statutory services or green spaces, museums, galleries or whatever within a local area, so that when we got to the end of a case and somebody had found a housing solution, we could sort of turn around and say, great, you've managed to find a property, here's some more information to kind of help you on your way for that sort of next step sort of thing. So that was kind of all happening in the background, and it was all going swimmingly, and we were thrilled at the progress and how everybody was managing all of the appointments in person and such. And then obviously COVID sort of hit. And I think there's probably two things that maybe I want to talk about in terms of what that meant for us with the volunteer program. I think there's one side of it which is actually the sort of nuts and bolts of, well, what have we actually done differently through COVID as a result of COVID, what we're doing differently with the volunteer program now. And that's been quite exciting. But then I think there's also a second side of it as well, from a more organizational perspective, which has been about sort of how we sort of manage the change in the volunteer program as well, and what our relationship has looked like with the volunteers now going forward. Now we're not able to meet them in person and such. So I'll talk about the first things first, which I think is the super exciting stuff, and then I'll talk about the second stuff, which is important but maybe less exciting. It's a bit more organisational. So first thing in terms of, well, what have we actually done with the volunteer programme to make sure, as Olivia was sort of referencing, that obviously we wanted to make sure that our service, we were still supporting clients in as best way as possible. So one thing that we absolutely did move to doing, because we were seeing a huge number of referrals this time round, having a lot more people get in contact with the organisation, we started having our volunteers make contact with people when they first submit their kind of help form on the HOS website. So a lot of the time we might get clients who sort of fill in half of the form, or they get sort of a little bit confused maybe in the process. They don't quite know what information they're looking for. So we were able to use our volunteers to kind of make contact with those people who were filling out the form and just kind of check in and see exactly what help it was that they were looking for. And that meant that when the kind of referrals landed into Olivia's team and they were ready to be divvied up amongst all of the different brokers, we actually had a much more of a complete picture of kind of what a client case was going to look like. So we were able to kind of, instead of obviously having our volunteers going out in person and meeting clients and finding out more information that way, they were doing that sort of over the phone or via email. So kind of helping with that process there. In terms of clients that we already had, our volunteers have been able to do a lot more of the check-ins that Olivia was sort of referencing. So we did, for some particularly vulnerable clients that the brokers identified, we managed to buddy them up with some of our volunteers who sort of were checking in on an ongoing basis. Also some clients who went a little bit silent on us. Again, the brokers were obviously doing all of this themselves, but small team, huge number of referrals, we were able to get the volunteers involved in that as well. Other things that we've managed to do too, Olivia obviously referenced already that a large part of the housing in general sort of ground to a little bit of a halt. So some of the appointments and such that maybe our volunteers were kind of getting along to in the first instance, they weren't really happening. But what we were able to do was sort of divert the volunteer energy and enthusiasm into doing things like helping people fill out housing application forms. So one thing that our volunteers have been doing a really good job of is supporting clients to fill out application forms for social housing. So actually sitting down either via Zoom or Teams or Skype or just over the phone and actually taking time to run through a housing application form with clients. And that's made a huge amount of difference as well. Because again, that's exactly the sort of thing that Olivia and her team wants to do. But when you have hundreds and hundreds of clients and a very small team, that gets quite difficult. So we're able to kind of have our volunteers working on things in different ways. So I guess that's a little bit about sort of what changes maybe we had with the volunteer program. I said that there's one other thing that I wanted to talk about, which is maybe a bit more organizational, as I said, but it might interest some of you. All of those changes obviously impacted on sort of how we were managing the volunteer program as well, and kind of what tools we were using to make sure that we were supporting our volunteers. So far, I've spoken about kind of how we were using the volunteers to support the clients, but obviously my job is to support the volunteers that we have and make sure that they're valued and feel part of the organisation. So I think one thing that's worth saying is that we had a very a big change, I guess, in the level of engagement that we had from our volunteers. So some volunteers became a lot more available if they've been furloughed at work and therefore had a lot more time to put into these projects. Other volunteers had to take a little bit of a step back. And that's been quite variable and is still kind of ongoing as and when sort of different things have changed in people's lives. So that's absolutely been a challenge. I guess in the same way that maybe Olivia saw her workload go like that, because we had more clients, I suddenly had a lot more volunteer hours available. So my workload went a bit like that as well. So that's the first thing that absolutely changed. But the other side of things was definitely this shift to kind of getting the volunteers maybe embedded a bit more in some of the, I guess, internal structures and kind of online systems and things. So where before we had the volunteers sort of buddying at meetings, sort of turning up at places with brokers, suddenly they were a bit more, I guess they had a bit more access to the clients and people's email addresses and things like that. So there was a large part that we had to do in terms of setting people up and skilling people up in terms of the IT side of things, so that they could actually use all of the HOS systems that we have access to as people who work from home, so that they could do the volunteering that way themselves. So that was quite a lot of time. And I guess the kind of final thing that I think has changed as well is a little bit of the almost sort of social side of volunteering too. So though we were all working from home before, and some of our volunteers were kind of used to volunteering online too, we did have sort of phone support and things like that going on, but we were trying to meet up in person as much as possible. We have absolutely had to change that, just like these kinds of events have all had to be put online. And I will say that's definitely more of a challenge, trying to work out how to kind of keep that social side of things up. We've got a thank you event, which is happening next week. So we're going to attempt to do an afternoon tea virtually. So we are going to be sending our volunteers some tea, some scones, etc. So we'll see how that goes. But I guess, to sum up, I guess the volunteering, it has shifted to be a lot more online, just like everything else. But as part of that, we have sort of, I think, found different ways to support the brokers and all the different things. So it has been challenging, but also I think we've found a really positive way of kind of approaching all the changes that we've seen. So that was a bit about volunteering, I guess, and what we've been doing. I guess we're happy to take any questions, maybe.
That's great, Ben and Olivia.
Yeah,
thank you
absolutely.
so much for that. I'm just amazed that the numbers have gone absolutely through the roof. Do you have any idea why that might have happened, or is that just a daft question?
I think it was a wee bit of what I said, where in the beginning, where people thought that this is all going to be over soon, so they kind of put their housing issues to one side, and they think, you know, maybe we'll enjoy these few weeks of furlough and a few weeks of lockdown, and once that's all over, you kind of get back to real life and you start to kind of deal with the real life things again. So I think that was potentially an element. When we look at the reasons why people were coming through to us, there was definitely a bit of a shift in the housing issues and the reasons that people were coming to us, and we were sort of noticing things like neighbour noise was an issue. Obviously, people are in their house, you know, all of the time. Everybody's working from home, so that was definitely something that increased. We noticed lots of sort of either relationship breakdowns that happened pre-COVID and partners couldn't move out, etc., or that there had been relationship breakdowns during the lockdown and people were looking for alternative housing solutions. So that played quite a big part in it. It is quite interesting though, because I think there's quite a lot of people who perhaps after lockdown ended might have kind of disappeared off again, because the easing of the restrictions and everything meant that, you know, you can kind of go back to a bit more of normal life, and things that might have been sort of getting to you have kind of gone away again. So
yeah, I suppose, yes, I think it's relationship breakdown's a big one just now, isn't it? So I don't want to hog the questions. I've got another few questions, but I'd like to ask people to put their hand up if we've got a question. Don't all rush forward. Okay, while we're waiting for folk, can I ask you another couple of questions then?
Yep, absolutely.
Oh, there's Carolyn Malone. Carolyn, hello.
Hi, I thought that was really interesting. I know quite a bit about Housing Options Scotland. We have regular contact with yourselves, and I thought Olivia's. I thought it was really interesting to hear about the sheltered housing. You know, the uptake. I'm just wondering if there's, you know, people that need a bit more than the sheltered, if they're not really sure. What process did they go through, Olivia, at your end of, you know, helping them to find something that fits, you know, someone that doesn't need care, but maybe just needs a little helping hand for a while to get where they need to be?
Yeah, I mean, I think what we do is we're able to sort of provide the options that do exist to people, and that is essentially based on their kind of their wants and their needs, as well as their financial situation. So, for instance, if we're working with an older person who is, you know, kind of looking to downsize or kind of isn't managing their own home or whatever, sheltered housing is always something that we will recommend. What we're able to do is provide information on what sheltered housing is, what you can expect from it, and you know, the sort of the differences between that and kind of the higher levels of sort of, you know, care home, nursing home, that I think sometimes people still get a little bit confused with. So it's explaining to them that it's still about living independently, but just with that little bit more support there, that's kind of security of knowing that there's somebody there to kind of watch out for you. But I mean, ultimately, all of our clients, we provide the information, but it's down to the client really to make the decision for themselves on whether or not they feel that that is a good option for them at their time in their life.
Okay, that's lovely. Thank you very much.
No worries.
Do we have any more questions? Can I ask Olivia and Ben, do you have any restrictions on who's eligible to use your services? Does it have to be people from a housing association or a local authority, or can homeowners or private renters?
Yeah, so we work cross tenure. So as long as you fit into one of our three main categories, which is if you're an older person, now an older person we class as anybody over 55. So if you are a member of the armed forces, or you were a member of the armed forces, then you can apply to our service. And the third one is if you have a disability. Now, our definition of disability is very wide and all-encompassing. So we include things such as learning disability, sensory impairment, mental health issues. So although it's the three kind of categories, they're actually they kind of manage to reach quite a lot of people. you know. So as long as you can kind of fit into one of those, then that's fine. But yes, we work with people who are owners, renters, social renters, private renters, and we also offer advice on each of those options as well.
Okay, thanks. Caroline, did you want to ask anything else? You've still got your hand up, Mrs. Oh, Tom Hester.
Sorry.
Are you okay? Tom, where's Tom?
Yeah, I'm just unmuting myself there.
Okay, thanks, Tom.
I'd probably like to ask you this. We're currently for North Lanarkshire Council, and we're currently doing some work around new build housing and people with disabilities. And it'd probably be interesting to get your experience just now about how people are managing through that process and how they sort of interact or what response they get from private developers and try to buy new build houses. So maybe it's not something for you to talk about just now, but maybe if we could maybe get in touch.
I think I might have been in contact with one of your colleagues already. We had an email from South Lanarkshire Council letting us know that they wanted some information on folks who were trying to buy and then would then need to adapt their current property. But
Aye. There is a thing coming forward, all 10-year targets for building houses that are wheelchair livable. And it'd be really interesting knowing for an organisation who are working with people or meeting with people like that to get what their experiences are. And
absolutely.
One of the problems we're really having there, Olivia, is sort of quantifying the need and the demand for that, because what we're trying to do is go to private developers and say, we think a 5% target of all your new build is this, but we don't really have the information to back that up. So it'd be interesting to what an organisation like yourself, you're saying you've got a lot of contacts, or you're that. What sort of experience you're getting, and what sort of are people looking for that type of housing and finding it's not there, or they're being unfairly treated as they go forward for it.
Absolutely. I mean, if there's any specific sort of things that you would like, any kind of figures or anything, then you can pass my email around and you can get in touch. But I think generally I would say for folks that are trying to buy a new build property and they need specific adaptations to it, it can be very difficult. It can be very difficult trying to approach a developer and trying to tap into their sort of social conscience about sort of saying, you know, if you did this, here are the benefits for this person. But I think any kind of developer you go to, and even if you kind of housing associations as well who've tried to build properties that are suitable for somebody's specific need, there's always the kind of, you know, the horror stories of, we worked with this client for months and we did everything to their specification, and then the day came and we handed them over the keys and they said, actually, do you know what, no, we don't want it. And then you're left with a specially adapted property to a particular individual, and then you're kind of left with it, and you need to get somebody else into it. So there's always those kind of horror stories. But yes, there are people out there who would like to go forward with this option. I'm working with a disabled couple in Edinburgh at the moment, who've approached a private developer at the sort of planning stage, but trying to get in at the right exact time, you know, when the plans can still be changed, but before they've been approved. But it's very tough. But yeah, we can chat about that more if you like.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thanks. And I think we've got Charlie and Gillian. Charlie? Hi, Charlie. Charlie?
Hiya, sorry, forgot I needed to unmute. Olivia, would you say that your role at the start of the pandemic was a bit more kind of pastoral in a way, just because you were having to people were really worried about moving and stuff, and you just had to be there to kind of chill them out a bit?
Yeah, I mean, I would think so. I think my role became very pastoral within the organisation and with our clients. You know, I was having to check in with everybody. I was having to make sure that our team were okay working from home, and that they were coping and that they were managing. And then, kind of much the same with a lot of our clients. There was a lot of anxiety. You know, people who've been really desperate to move, and all of a sudden it was as if that wee glimmer of hope had just been kind of snatched away from them, and people were really worried about how they were going to survive the lockdown and the situations that they found themselves. So yeah, it is unfortunate that in many instances during the proper lockdown, we weren't able to provide people. We could give people the advice and the information, but the actual tangible outcomes of people being able to move property, it wasn't an option. So yes, lots of reassurance that at some point it would be possible, and that we just need to wait, and hopefully everything will kind of get back to normal soon.
I think you've got a very soothing voice, so I imagine you.
Thank you very much.
I was just going to ask Ben as well. Ben, did you find that some of your, was it easier for some of the volunteers to keep in touch with the clients because it was on the phone? Because obviously, they're normally used to seeing them in person, but if they were just picking up the phone, was something that could have been seen as positive, or?
Yeah, I think definitely. I mean, one thing sort of before the pandemic, a lot of the kind of appointments that I guess our housing buddies, our volunteers were doing were thought of, the standard thing was to meet in person, and that was just sort of what we did. And I think what that did in many respects was limited actually the level of support that we could offer people, in the sense that, if you were somewhere in the Highlands, and because we don't have a volunteer particularly local, it's not the case that we couldn't offer the support, but it was less likely that we were going to be able to find a volunteer who could get out and meet you and sit down and fill out an application form for social housing, for example. But because everybody was kind of contained within their homes, I guess, for a while, and still are. Yeah, absolutely. So we've sort of seen, we've done quite well. The volunteers that we have are sort of split across Scotland anyway, but absolutely, it definitely did open things up for folk, in the sense that because we were starting to do things over the phone or via video call, it definitely meant that we could offer more support. And I think as well, just more broadly, because of, I think we've all just got better at video calling, throughout all of this. I wish I'd invested in Zoom at the beginning, because I would be a millionaire now. Our clients, I think, also got better at that, and our volunteers got better at that. So actually, in terms of that as being a method of being able to offer that level of support, it just suddenly was a bit more available for people. So I think, yeah, we definitely, I don't want to use the word benefit, but we definitely benefited from that, I think, as a volunteer program, and the support we could offer.
That's amazing. Thank you.
Thanks, Tara. I've now got two more hands up. Gillian and Moira. I'll come to Gillian. Someone says that Lilius has had her hands up. I can't see a Lilius, but if we go ahead with Gillian, then I'll try and find Lilius is in the room. Gillian?
Hi, I'm the Common Housing Register Manager at North Ayrshire Council, and I manage a team of occupational therapists. So probably a couple of questions just for Olivia and Tom. This might be of use to you. We manage occupational therapists who carry out an accessible housing assessment, which is normally done at home, because it's very much a functional assessment of how applicants access their daily activities within their home. They get that priority, and then they're potentially put in the register to be rehoused with that priority. So Olivia, just with your experience through the pandemic, have you came across any other organisation that has been able to assess anybody or any clients on their functional assessments using any kind of virtual technology? Because I'm really keen to see if we could purchase some kind of software or some kind of super duper technology that we could, I think, kind of NHS, where I live in Ayrshire and Arran, they have a kind of anytime, anywhere software. I don't know if anybody's had the experience of using that, but it was just to see if you're aware of any technology, because obviously OTs can't go into people's houses right now.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not really aware of anything to do with sort of occupational therapy. I mean, our experience has been much of what you've said. Anybody that has been waiting for an assessment or kind of the outcome of an assessment, anything, it's all just been put on hold for the time being. I mean, the video calls, the Zoom meetings, all that sort of stuff, I know it's been used successfully with sort of house viewings and things, but I don't necessarily know whether or not that would kind of work in the same way. but we can, if you want to kind of drop me a wee email, we can maybe kind of look into this a wee bit further. I wondered if Blackwood, we've got some contacts within Blackwood. They've got sort of a lot of sort of care technology that they use within their own homes. So it might be worthwhile having a chat with them to see if there's anything that they could recommend.
Yeah, that'd be good. Because we are doing them over the telephone, but obviously somebody with very complex needs, we do need to like measure equipment in terms of like wheelchair styles and designs, what type it is, door widths. So we obviously can't do that right at this moment, and we probably won't be able to do that for the foreseeable future just now. So I was just wondering if there was anybody out there that had any kind of technology that's been able to overcome that, because we've been not allowed to use Zoom because it breaches our ICT security measures. So we are really struggling just now, as I said, with real complex cases, people that are like in the spinal unit can't return home. We are really, really struggling trying to like finalise assessments and outcomes.
Well, we're working. I mean, I've got a client in the spinal injuries unit in Glasgow at the moment who will need to go home at some point. So that's one that I can kind of keep an eye on if you want, and I'll see if just being in a different part of Scotland, if there's anything that they're doing, and I can pass any information on to you.
That's great. Tom, I don't mind sharing with you our accessible housing assessment process, because we link closely in with our development team in order to deliver significantly adapted and highly adapted wheelchair accessible housing. So I don't know if you want to drop me an email, I can share our process and what our occupational therapist role is with that.
Okay, I'll do that.
That's great. Thanks.
Okay,
nice. TPAS webinars even do a bit of matchmaking. Well, it's not quite matchmaking, but it's just along those lines. So I think Moira and Lilius had their hands up. So Moira, and then I'll come to Lilius. Moira. Hello, Moira.
Hi, yes, a question for Ben. Have you got volunteers all over Scotland? And if not, have you found that since you've been using online things, that you've got people from places that you haven't had them before, because they can do it without travelling? Yeah.
Exactly. So we've had, I think over the past year, we've probably had a team of about, I think 28 volunteers is kind of what we've had as a group. Now, some of those volunteers have been, I guess, a lot more engaged than others. So, you know, some of them have kind of come on and done one small piece of work, and then that's sort of been their fill, and that's been okay. But in terms of, I guess, the sort of core group, maybe if you want to use that terminology, generally we do okay geographically. So we've got certainly across the Central Belt, we do quite well, but we've also got somebody based in Dundee or just outside of Dundee. We do have somebody in the Highlands, and I forget exactly where. I do know they're Highlands Local Authority. But yeah, we definitely, the research project in particular, which is looking at producing these guides for different local authority areas, that's something that we saw a lot more people pick up, because just like you say, I think, you know, it's something that you can do from any part of Scotland, and also it really lends itself as a volunteer project to be done from home as well, because it's all about, you know, researching and collating information and collating these guides. So we have definitely seen things grow in that respect. That's sort of I think the next part of what I'm going to be doing, or with Julia, our new staff member that Olivia mentioned, is doing a bit more sort of specific targeted outreach and sort of saying, hey, we actually haven't got anybody based in the Borders, or hey, we haven't got anybody based in Perth and Kinross, you know, can we find them and make contact with the different volunteer centres there as well? So we do okay, and we'd certainly span the Central Belt very successfully, perhaps unsurprisingly. But yeah, there's definitely more to be done in that respect. But I think you're right that, you know, because we've shifted to doing things online a lot more, it does just make things that more manageable for everybody as well. So yeah, thanks.
Thank you very much.
Thought you were volunteering there, Moira. Lilius? Hi, Lilius.
Hi, can you hear me?
We can hear you.
I was just.
Oh, we can't hear you now, Lilius. Hello, Lilius. Lilius.
Is that?
That's it. You're back again. You're
Sorry.
back again. Yeah.
It was just Olivia. Do you ever refer anybody to Poppy Scotland if they need financial help? I'm talking about the ex-service community. Sorry, you were saying that you deal with quite a few people from the ex-service community.
Yes, we do. Yes, we've got some connections within Poppy Scotland and a variety of other veterans organisations. So
it's just I worked with them for 15
oh,
years.
did you? Yeah.
Obviously.
Yeah, no, we definitely do. Obviously, you know yourself, the veteran sector's awash with money and able to support many of their own kind of communities. So
having a hard time just now.
Yeah, well, but yes, we do.
Okay, thank you.
No worries.
Thanks. Have we got any more questions for anybody? Moira, did you put your hand up again? No. Any more questions? No. Well, thanks. That was really fascinating, Olivia and Ben. You're doing a power of work in a very challenging time. And I'm sure your clients would applaud you and just say thanks very much to all the hard work that you're doing. There's a number of people in this room, Ben, that are from outside the Central Belt. I'll not name names, Moira, but there are definitely a number of people from outside the Central Belt, and we've got links to across Scotland. So if we can use our networks to help and to advertise your promotion, your volunteering opportunities, we've got an officer based in the Western Isles. We do loads of work in the islands, Highlands, all across Scotland, so we're more than happy to support you with that. So thank you for coming along. Very, very briefly, our next webinar is on the 4th of November, and that's primarily for tenants. It was going to be advertised after today, and it's from the Scottish Parliament. It's the Scottish Parliament Social Security and COVID-19 inquiry, and it's this conversation with the Scottish Parliament to feed into the Scottish Government's Social Security Committee inquiry. So they want to hear from people who have used the benefits system during the emergency, those who are in work, out of work and seeking work. And there's also an online survey that goes along with that, but we'll be getting that information out today. We've got a scrutiny week, the 16th to 18th of November, 3 mornings all about scrutiny, and we've got Kevin Stewart, the Housing Minister, coming along to open that for us, which we're absolutely delighted about, and Michael Cameron from the regulator is going to be there too. So you didn't come along to hear me gibbering. We've had lots of information, lots of really good questions today. So if I can just say a final thank you to Olivia and Ben and to yourselves for coming along. I hope you've enjoyed it. I certainly have. And thank you again for giving up your time to come and join us. And we've had a bit of matchmaking as well. Who knew, Gillian? Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Thanks for having me.
Bye. Bye.
All right then. Bye.
Bye, folks.